Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I am back with part two, reviewing the latest updates with Aftershoot's AI calling and editing app. If you missed part one, it's just a video or two back in my feed. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you're at all interested in Aftershoot, because it emphasizes the calling aspect of what they do, which is what, in my opinion, Aftershoot is just absolutely fantastic at. They have been doing it the longest. They started as an AI calling app only, and over the past almost 2 years now, I've been focusing on editing. Take a quick second to thank all of my patrons for their support and making it possible for me to do these kinds of YouTube videos. And also mention that I have a workshop newly announced for Houston, Texas, this February 25th. It's gonna be a small group, max 12 people, in a full day hands-on workshop, doing a session with a couple, going through all of my workflow from beginning to end as far as editing, shooting, and of course, the business and marketing aspects of what I do in my work. So if you're interested in that, use the link that's in the description here. Okay, back to this. So I bumped into an issue at the very end of my previous video. It was meant to be just a giant review of like Aftershoot's newest capabilities. And quite often this happens when shooting with a new camera body. Support for the sensor hasn't been totally updated across all the apps you might use. This happens quite often with Adobe's Camera Raw. But it's been a few weeks now since I had the R1, and I immediately reached out to Aftershoot support, and they got back to me within minutes with an update of how long it was going to take. It was about a day, I think, before they were able to update support for the R1. I downloaded and installed the app, and I'm ready to jump into it right here. So I've actually shot a few sessions since the last video was made. I'm gonna run this through one of my more recent shoots, which was working with Aaron in New York City. We started at Grand Central Station and just kind of walked away over to the New York City Public Library. And all he was looking for was a couple different varieties of styles and looks for his business profile headshot type stuff. So pretty straightforward. Maybe I'll talk through some of these actual ideas a little bit later, but I want to go ahead and just get these right into Aftershoot, which is currently open and running on my system. So I'm going to say create new album. Now there are a couple different ways you can get your images into Aftershoot. And one of the things I've always loved and appreciated about their approach, you can just find the folder in your directory tree, wherever it's on your computer, and click and drag it into Aftershoot's main window, and it will take it from there. So you don't have to close Lightroom catalogs or open Lightroom catalogs or anything, but they do have the option, if you know where your Lightroom catalog is, to import directly from that. You can find your catalog, open the directory tree, and go from there. You can also just drag in a folder, which I think is a much, much easier approach and the way that I like to do it. So I'm gonna say portrait and headshots, hit next. So one of the newer features Aftershoot has rolled out in the last couple months is called one-click call and edit. And this video isn't gonna go into the results of the calling at all, because I have my previous video for that, but I'm gonna go ahead and select this just to see how long it takes, glance through the calling results, and then jump right into the editing results. So I'm gonna say try now. My preference is almost always to include more AI results in whatever the call selection is, because I still take a manual pass over everything the AI gives me. And yeah, the more setting, it tends to choose about 35, maybe % of the overall images, and that's a good balance for me personally. So I'm gonna say more, hit next. Now, I trained an AI profile back when they first launched editing, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. So I'm gonna stick with that because my editing style really hasn't changed that much since then. I'm gonna choose my custom camera profile. Now, AI cropping is something that I've used on and off with tools like this. And I find that if you're shooting in a variety of, complex scenarios across an entire session or maybe a wedding day, it's giving up a little bit too much creative control, doesn't quite know what I'm looking for from one shot to the next. If you're shooting in a very controlled environment, like maybe student pictures or something, like on a tripod or in a studio environment, maybe AI cropping would work better for you, but I'm turning that off because I just didn't love the results from my shooting style. AI straightening, however, I can always tell now when I've remembered to turn that on or off, because it just kind of highlights how little bit I am from one shot to the next, just totally not level. And I am a sucker for having just straight horizon lines almost all the time, unless there's a really true intentional need for some sort of Dutch angle. Okay, apply my Lightroom preset, AI masking. So this is another feature a lot of people love, but I just tend to not utilize because I do a lot of my emphasizing of an image using gradients. So AI masking will selectively find your subject and then allow you to do things to that mask selectively. For example, brightening it relative to the background, or maybe some kind of contrast add or something like that. For the style that I shoot, especially with really wide open shallow depth of field with a ton of bokeh to begin with, I get a lot of separation from the background right out of the gate, and I don't feel the need to ever add AI masking to make my subjects pop. But if you're shooting at f2, f2.8, or any smaller type of aperture, I would consider AI masking. And again, it's not creating more bokeh or anything like that. It's just going to selectively brighten your subject or do certain editing steps to make them pop relative to the background. So I'm not going to worry about all these filters. Camera, yep, R1, here we go. Next step, start editing cull. So if this update is appropriate and works, then the R1 file should work fine after it's gone through the culling. I'm gonna set a timer. It is not an exact science, so I don't mind being a few seconds off here, and resume the video as soon as everything's done. Okay, just jumping in here while this is still churning away with editing, which is absolutely working now with the R1 files. You do see this Adobe DNG converter process of, I'm guessing it's taking the full res raw files and then making them much, much smaller, probably just a few hundred pixels as a DNG raw file to just speed up the processing time. But if you are confused as to why you suddenly see this huge string of, 8 to 10 DNG converters suddenly running in the bottom corner, it's just part of the process of what Aftershoot is doing to get through the files very, very quickly instead of having to edit the true high-res files. If you think about it, with most editing decisions, you don't really need to see the full 6,000 pixels for decisions that you're gonna make based on exposure, tone, with contrast and white balance, right? You can get by with much, much smaller files for those broad strokes editing decisions. So the trade-off of getting much, much faster processing time, it's only been about 4 minutes and there's only maybe 4 or 5 minutes left according to this. That trade-off of making it maybe less than 10 minutes to go through 1,200 images is definitely worth it. Okay, so I refilled my coffee and editing is complete. It literally took like 5 minutes. That is crazy fast. Okay, so it says you export edited images, one-click export to Lightroom Classic. That works. So I'm kind of curious if I can just not bother with any of that export stuff from the Aftershoot app and just go back into my Lightroom catalog, right-click on metadata, and then read metadata from file. Let's see what happens. There's the edit. So it's definitely equalizing the exposure value. I'm gonna go ahead and just select all images, right-click, metadata, read metadata from files. So this is taking all the edit, all the culling, color coding and everything, and just updating what is already imported into my Lightroom catalog with all of that information. So let's give that just a minute to update, and then we'll start going through the results. One extra thing I'm gonna do is select all the images and then build standard previews. So this isn't the video to get into Lightroom speed or the difference between smart previews or standard previews, but if you have smart previews already built, which hopefully you do when you import into Lightroom, it should be very, very fast to rebuild standard previews because it's just working from a small resolution version of your raw files. And what you're actually seeing when you're in library mode are the standard previews. You're not seeing your actual raw files. You're just seeing an embedded small JPEG preview of what that raw file looks like, which is kind of interesting, but it keeps everything running very, very fast in Lightroom. And I know there's many layers and levels to what could be slowing down Lightroom on your computer, but I know a lot of people struggle with that issue, unfortunately. But for me, Lightroom has run very, very fast since figuring out all the different trade-offs between the different previews and when you should render them and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna let this finish rendering and then we'll dive into the results. Okay, so everything has been rendered and ready to go. I'm gonna do one of my favorite things and just hold the right arrow key through the entire session. We'll look at the entire thing, probably only take like 20 seconds, and then we'll go through and analyze the actual results. So here we go. Nice. Boom. So I forgot to mention, I actually did use a secondary camera at this shoot, which is the Hasselblad 907X50C. That's a really interesting and a favorite camera of mine, but I only took 22 frames with it. So I'm just gonna sort by Canon R1 and not even get into those images right now. Now, the number one thing I was looking for when I'm going through the images this quickly is just the overall equalization or consistency of the exposure. I tend to shoot very, very underexposed so that I retain highlights and I can work back the balance of how the dynamic range looks in post-processing. And so something like this image didn't really get edited quite as bright as I would have expected in the AI, especially given these other images are quite similar in like the exact same shooting environment. But I'm not looking for perfection with the AI results, right? I have yet to come across an AI app that without me having to look or make manual adjustments in any way, I can deliver to my clients and be 100% confident in the results. That probably will happen someday, but we're still not quite there yet. And that's fine with me. As long as this gets me to a 90% starting point where I can just take over from there, it saves time regardless. Here's another area which was really an sort of a more complex mixed lighting scenario. Behind me was one of those touristy, by New York paraphernalia place with a square of LED lights, which kind of created this wrap of light behind me that I could use in a really interesting way, I thought, considering we were just on the street using natural light. But it did a really, really good job. Here, okay, some of the white balance got a little too cool for my taste. So it went from, 46.1 temperature to 44.74. So that's another thing I did notice indoors. Where were we? Here at the and other mixed lighting. It nailed the edit for the majority of images, but sometimes something in its algorithm is getting confused and it's having this crazy blue shift. Maybe that's something specific again to the Canon R1 sensor. I'm not really sure, but that's something I'm always looking out for when it comes to AI editing and results, because you can really be in the flow of everything's looking great. I only have to do minor adjustments here and there, and then you get to one that's way, way off, and it's annoying. It kind of pulls you out of that really fast, efficient sort of workflow, and you kind of have to dive into something with a lot more depth than you previously thought you would need. But one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts is the paste from previous. So like I said, if the majority of the time it is nailing the white balance in a particular scene or scenario, I'm not going to fixate too much on when the AI gets something wrong. The other great thing is that Aftershoot processes everything locally to your computer. So you're not having to need an internet connection or cloud processing for any part of this process. Other than when you initially build your AI profile, that does need to be sent to the cloud and analyzed. After that, everything is done locally. So you're not paying any money for an edit that you're unhappy with. It's all just using your own computing processing power. And yeah, a lot of other cloud-based options, their results might be different, but it does cost you a few cents per edit. And with Aftershoot, you just don't even have to think about that math. It is all done locally, which I think a lot of photographers really appreciate, especially if you're just trying this early on in your career and you're just experimenting. This is a wonderful app to really do that. And they also, I kind of overlooked this here, but they give you a really nice analysis of what all your settings were and just feedback about what you previously used and what your AI profiles are, so that if you do want to restart editing right here in the app, you can click that and you have a really nice reference point as to what you did previously and maybe what you want to change moving forward. So they give you a lot of tools and you're really set up to keep honing in and chipping away on a workflow within the Aftershoot app that gets more and more refined as time goes on. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet and wrap it up there. I'm really excited to dive into some of the newer features Aftershoot has been touting, specifically the retouch option, but that's only available in testing right now. You can join the waitlist if you're interested in that, but I don't think it's fair to make a review video for something that's still totally in testing phase. I am excited to try it, and I will probably update here whenever that is fully released and I'm ready to go through it. But as always, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.